Good morning, everyone. You look a little hungry. Wait, was I supposed to cook? Was I supposed to bring breakfast? But seriously, I'm a chef, but I really identify as an eater. My idea of a great day is having lunch with a friend while talking about what we're going to have for dinner. And raise your hand if you don't think more than one time a day about what you're going to have for dinner. Anyone? Oh, there's a couple. But most of us, a lot of us are obsessed with food. And we cringe when our friends call us foodies, but we cringe because we know they're right. And as foodies, we're doing more than just talking about food. We're talking about where our food comes from, who's producing it. We have tote bags for our tote bags. Our compost piles have their own tumblers. We argue about whether pork tastes better if the pig eats peanuts or if the pig eats acorns. We're working on rebuilding infrastructure from slaughterhouses to local food distribution systems. We measure carbon footprint of grass-fed beef from Missouri or corn-fed beef from Hillsborough. We talk, not as much as we should yet, but we talk a lot about hunger, about food deserts, about how to make fresh food available to everyone. We churn butter, we bake bread, we make pickles, wishing that our grandmothers or our mothers could see us. We dream of our ideal dinner table, filled with friends who are no longer there. Because we're foodies, we think about what they might have cooked for us. But it's the people who we miss. Because as much as we spend all of our time talking about food, we all know that who is at the table matters more, is much more essential to life than anything that we could eat there. But there is a problem. It's a problem that us foodies, us eaters, us shoppers, it's a problem that we need to do something about. We're not all at the table. We're very comfortable talking about GMOs, biodiversity, soil loss, global warming, smoked salt. But we often ignore something that's much more fundamental to the way we live: the lives of the people who harvest the food that we eat. At any given time in North Carolina, there are 150,000 farm workers who help produce almost all of the local food we have here and all of the food that we export. The problem is that they are invisible. A few years ago, I learned a little bit about farm work in North Carolina from a friend who at the time was an inspector for farm worker housing for the North Carolina Department of Labor. He told me how under current regulations, a 5-gallon bucket is considered a laundry facility. He told me about a grower in Hendersonville, North Carolina, who in the middle of the winter was charging workers $25 a week to live in housing that had standing water, no heat, no mattresses, and no usable toilets. He described horrific injuries and death due to unsafe working conditions. Babies born horribly deformed because their mothers worked in fields where pesticide regulation was not enforced. He often visited a labor camp in Allegheny County of 700 people where violence and exploitation were rampant. This farm had been fined multiple times by the Department of Labor, but conditions there remained unchanged. At the time, this farm was selling Christmas trees and pumpkins to Walmart and to Whole Foods. There are labels that we can all look at, that we all know about, that attest to the humane treatment of pigs, chickens, cows. But there's none that really tell us anything about the lives of the people who harvest our food. Yet, when we eat food that another person has grown and harvested for us, whether we know it or not, we become connected to them. Chefs have a way with food, don't they? It's kind of an otherworldly look that we're going for a lot of the time, never before been touched by human hands. I mean, we're usually wearing gloves. But seriously, we don't really stop to think when we're eating in a restaurant of all the hands that have been touching and manipulating our food. And it's even harder to conjure up the people who are growing and harvesting our food, their hands. They are invisible. We grow a lot of sweet potatoes in North Carolina. I have some here. We grow half the sweet potatoes that are grown in the United States. That's 500,000 tons of sweet potatoes. These workers are so invisible that it's impossible for me, I don't know, is it impossible for anyone to imagine what it would be like to dig a ton of sweet potatoes? Now think about digging 2 tons of sweet potatoes, because that's how many sweet potatoes you need to dig and haul if you're a farm worker in North Carolina today to make $50. That's over 200 of our nice tote bags of sweet potatoes. The growth of hog and chicken production in the last couple decades represents the most stunning threat to the environment and to social fabric in the South. Working in a poultry plant in the United States is literally one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. There are poultry plants, though, in North Carolina that have not seen a single inspector in 5 years and counting. These workers are invisible. I recently found that some friends a long time ago had fostered a child who had come here from Mexico to work in the Townsend chicken plant in Siler City. He was 15 at the time. I realized that I had served some of this chicken that was processed in his plant, this local organic chicken, in my restaurant, right around the time that he worked there. These workers are invisible. They're so invisible that we often don't even think about the fact that many of them are children, 10, 12, 14-year-old children harvesting food in our fields in North Carolina, right alongside their parents, and across the United States this happens. It's often the case that these children are incredibly hungry. Farm workers in North Carolina, Latino farm workers, 47% of them are considered food insecure, meaning they go to bed hungry at night. If you eat 4 pints of blueberries in North Carolina this summer, at least one of them was likely harvested by a child. The abundance of the grocery store is an illusion. It's not true abundance. The grapefruit that I had this morning for breakfast is really not there. It's a weird kind of fantasy, only brought to us by an unprecedented depletion of resources that have an inevitable end. Sometimes I buy a big box of arugula, you know the one I'm talking about. It's $4. It takes up half the refrigerator. It rots before you can possibly eat it. But that arugula is $4 because in Salinas, there's a worker struggling through a 12-hour day in 100-degree heat, making $10,000 a year. We have all of these cheap luxuries, cheap everyday luxuries, that we've come to see as our right. Pints of blueberries, sweet potatoes we don't have to dig, chicken that's so cheap we can eat it 3 times a day. Like these cheap luxuries, all of these things are only possible because of the near slavery conditions on farms that some of them are 10, 15 miles from here. The slavery conditions of the people who harvest our food. This is not a food issue. It's not a labor issue. It's not really even an immigration issue. The living conditions of workers in North Carolina and all across the United States is a human rights issue. But there's good news. Us foodies, us eaters, us shoppers and cooks, we can do something about this right now, this week. We could decide that we're going to do 3 things about this. First, we can support the amazing local organizations and national organizations that are working on this issue. There's just 2 I'm going to mention, but there's many. One is Toxic Free NC, and the other is Student Action with Farm Workers, both great groups in North Carolina. Their information's on the TEDxUNC website. When we shop for food, we need to get to know the people we're buying food from. It doesn't matter if it's at a farmer's market or at a grocery store. We need to talk to them and engage them and tell them that we care about this issue. And number 3, we just need to keep talking. This is a system-wide problem, and it's an important step for foodies to recognize that we're part of this system. We need to bring this conversation to produce aisles, friends' dinner parties. We need to make it okay to talk about this. Because we all know it matters what we eat, but it matters much more who is at the table. The process of growing and cooking and eating food is one of our last remaining connections to the earth. It links us to people from all times. It integrates value and meaning into our everyday lives. When we eat food that someone else has harvested for us, we become connected to them. It's our challenge to make that connection visible and to make a place for farm workers at the table.